Let's stand for the pledge, please. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
President Daly?
Here.
Vice President McNall?
Here.
Trustee Headland?
Here.
Trustee Valentine?
Here.
And Trustee Clemens is absent this evening.
Thank you, Ms. Platt. Happy almost back to school, everybody. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, September 14th. We do typically do the first Tuesday of the month, but the first Tuesday falls on Rosh Hashanah, so we will be doing our first September meeting on the 14th, right here in the auditorium at 7 p.m. And I'll just share with the public that the board had their annual retreat this past Sunday. It already feels like a long time ago, where we started really discussing the district goals and board goals and the board self-evaluation and just taking some time to make sure we're humming along for the school year and off to a good start. So I thank my board colleagues for their time and Dr. Benante. Yeah. It's time well spent when we spend time working on our work. So that happened, and now we have to go into a public hearing. And I understand that we have 3 items to conduct public hearings about, and we need to conduct a public hearing for each one. So I would like to make a motion to open the public hearing for the Haldane Central School District's Code of Conduct for the 21 to 22 school year. May I have a second?
Second.
Okay, the hearing is now open. Is there any comments from the public or comments from the board or Dr. Benante or Ms. Sniffen on the topic of the Code of Conduct? Now is a good time to share.
I have a couple things, just quick questions, and they're mostly text stuff, but there was one that said, I apologize because I cut and pasted it, and it says, take part in all district, students are allowed to or expected to or something, I forget what the lead in, it's number 17, says, take part in all district activities on an equal basis regardless or of actual or perceived race, color, weight, creed, national origin, ethnic group, religion, all that sort of stuff, or sex. My question was, by that statement, does that imply that, does that allow or enable girls to participate in boys' sports or boys to participate in girls' sports? Because I noticed in other things there was some language in there that said, I don't know, something else.
Julia, do you want to just for process sake, if you want to come up to the microphone, so it's easy for you to answer questions when they're presented.
I know that language is legal language that is taken directly from the school's attorney.
Okay.
I believe that it depends on the situation, the sport, things around students playing different sports based upon gender, identity, things like that.
But
So
Julie, if
I think
I'm not
it's
mistaken, I believe the section has policies regarding situations such as that.
Okay.
If a student if a female student, for example, wanted to participate in a boys program, and vice versa.
Yep. Okay.
And we would turn to a section policy also to guide our deliberations on consideration of that.
I was just does that by existing give a blanket right to anyone who wanted to do it? The answer is no. There are other things that we fall back on.
Correct. It will give blanket consideration. So it's not at face value would we say no necessarily, as Julia alluded to.
Cool.
We then would initiate a process for reviewing such a request.
Okay, cool. I noticed that in some places we talk about parents, in some places we talk about parents and guardians. Is there a legal distinction or requirement?
There's not, but it's a good point and duly noted, something to take a look at because it should refer to guardians, I believe.
I love that we have a specific call out for painting the bell.
There is a history there.
I'm sure there
care
is
to
a
know
history
about
there. Oh, in section 9 through 11, in section F, numbers 9 through 11, section F, it sort of feels like there's something that needs, the lead into this section says, students are subject to disciplinary action if they engage in any conduct that endangers. And then 9, 10, and 11 are, they don't feel like they follow the flow in the same way. They feel like they're
give me a
definitional.
page, or is it easier to?
Section F on student discipline. And then numbers 9 through 11. It basically says they'll be subject to disciplinary action if, and then there's a bunch of numbers, and 9, 10, 11 feels.
John, you have to do that one more time. I'm sorry. I'm on the table of contents now.
Okay.
It's probably easier for me to look at it that way.
Okay.
So it's student
Section-
conduct,
Yeah, section F, student discipline.
section F. So page 14. Do you care if I look over your shoulder real quick?
No, come here. It's just that
Oh,
this,
so you have it in an email.
yeah, this feels like a definition rather than a thing. I can also find it and just send it to you.
Yeah, because it's, a lot repeats too,
Yep.
in terms of what it says.
Oh, there it is.
Would you mind just
Nope.
sending it? Did I pass it?
Here you go.
There it is. Yeah.
There you go. So here.
Yep.
And then just 9, 10, 11. It feels like
Oh, 9, 10, 11 specific.
in that section. It feels like one's a definition and it's not really a,
I see what you're saying.
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. If I read it, to me, it's stating the conduct of sexual harassment not being. Yes, it then does define it.
Yeah.
But maybe it needs to be a little bit clearer is what you're stating in terms of not just giving the definition, but referring back to the statement on top that the
Yeah.
conduct of obviously sexual harassment is not permitted,
Yeah.
as opposed to just the definition.
10 makes sense, and also
Yeah.
number 11, which is engage in any conduct that endangers. Such conduct has a purpose or effect. It just doesn't track
Okay.
quite well. That's it. Thank you.
I have a question about in the track changes version, page 37, the course credit and attendance. Is that a clarification of a previous language? Was it just what kind of an edit?
No, so when you reviewed the policy manual, one of the policies that had some changes was the attendance and credit policy.
I see.
So that was one that we actually worked, not this current school year because of COVID. We had worked and started to work on it the year prior on the committee in terms of alignment of unexcused attendance, and then student receiving course credit if they had an excessive number of unexcused absences. So we did a lot of research in the region. We spoke with our school attorney, we got policy from other school districts, we looked at other school districts' code of conduct, and through the committee process, decided that we wanted to add to our policy that attendance matters, and that unexcused absences could result in not receiving credit. You make a shift and you start working instructionally, whether it's deeper learning experiences through project-based learning, through the communication where students are communicating in classrooms, and if you're not there, whether virtually or in person, you're not gaining that, and we value it, and it's important to be present in the room, there to engage in that work. And unexcused absences, excessive amounts, can impact you receiving that credit. Obviously, excused absences, sicknesses, that's not what this is talking about. It's referring more towards truancies or cuts or excessive unexcused absences.
Great.
So the code of conduct is now in line with
the
policy.
policies. Great.
Any other questions, thoughts for Julie? And just a reminder to the board, we approve this every year because it is a living, breathing document, and the Code of Conduct Committee meets every year throughout the year. It's an ongoing project, so we thank Ms. Sniffen for her ongoing attention to it and all the people that work on it with her. And I think with that, we can close the public hearing unless, do you have
Just
something
one
else?
comment,
Yeah.
Jen, for process sake. So John had talked about some language perhaps being cleaned up. Our recommendation would still be to approve the code of conduct this evening later on in the agenda, given that those changes I don't think are, would necessarily interfere, I don't get the sense would interfere with your ability to approve it. We'll go back, review that language if we feel, that way we have a code of conduct in place for the start of school next week. And then if there's a need to come back and put before the board a revised copy, just because we determined, based on John's note, that some language needed to be clarified, we can do that at a subsequent meeting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, I'm going to close the public hearing on the Code of Conduct. And then I'd like to make a motion to open a public hearing on the Haldane School District Athletic and Extracurricular Code of Conduct for the 21-22 school year. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. So now is the time to ask any questions or make any comments about the Athletic and Extracurricular Code of Conduct. Anything?
I'll just state that this was one document, if you recall, that we were
Yes.
hoping to review this year and take a look at and get our teeth into. And then we had 2 interim athletic directors and the turnover. So I think we look forward to this year actually really taking a look at this document and aligning it with the code of conduct a little bit better. If you recall, Margaret had some questions about it. And we said we were going to try to look at it this year, and it's just this year we did not get to that. But I know that Mr. Cowan and myself look forward to diving in with the committee a little bit deeper into this document this school year. So
Yes.
My only question was with reference, if I recall in previous conversations that the school has the ability to, if not regulate, ask the students to conduct themselves in ways that otherwise we would not. For instance, I'm thinking of a recent Supreme Court case in which it's debatable about whether or not we can regulate off-campus behavior, and this kind of refers to distributing digital images that may be lewd or otherwise. It's still within our right to hold individuals accountable in that respect.
Yes, so first, for extracurriculars and athletics, a higher standard can be implemented. Given that these are a privilege that we extend to students, it is not necessarily a basis of their experience, their core experience inside of school. I'm familiar with the court case. I'm glad you brought that up. It certainly was a prominent one. If I'm not mistaken, in that case, which referred to online speech where a high school age student was being critical of coach after she was not placed on a specific team. There was not only a question, and again, this is off the top of my head, Sean, so of the student's participation on the team, but I believe there was also discipline within the school for such speech. So that's something we do have to be wary of as it relates to how we were to implement any discipline for student speech. And the standard there is whether or not such speech in that case or action causes a reasonable disruption to the learning environment within the school. So the Supreme Court in that case had upheld that such speech that student took part in did not cause a disruption to learning.
I see.
But the school district still does have the right, if it determines that it does, and it crosses that threshold, and certainly there's subjectivity there, but that if such action does cause a disruption to the learning environment, to discipline a student.
Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, it's my understanding that extracurriculars are just that, they're extra,
Right.
Correct.
right? So that we're not legally obligated to provide them. There's no legal obligation for kids to participate in them.
Right.
They are, they're extras, and
Right.
because they're extras, we are allowed to place some more restrictions on behavior.
Thank you.
Any questions, further comments? Okay, thank you again, Ms. Sniffen, for your work. And with that, I will close the public hearing. And I would like to make a motion to open a public hearing for the Haldane Central School District Safety and Emergency Management Plan for the 21-22 school year. May I have a second, please?
Second?
Is there any discussion, comments, questions? Okay. Well, then I would like to close the public hearing. We will be voting on these three items later in the agenda. And I will turn it to Dr. Benante for his comments.
Thanks, Jen. I'd just like to echo your remarks at the start of the meeting. I appreciate the board's time on a Sunday morning to meet and retreat, and I feel similarly anytime that we have the opportunity to spend together and talk about board processes as well as board goals and district goals, I think is time well spent, and I'm excited for the start of the school year with this board and about the work that we're going to be embarking upon through this year. As you probably have noted, we're making our final preparations for the start of the school year as we get ready to welcome back staff and students next week. We are buttoning up a few things, and I know our outdoor learning environments are going to come together over the course of the next few days. And I just want to thank our facilities and maintenance staff for all of their efforts. There's been a lot of work that's going on in each building, and the schools look great, and they've been really working hard, and it really shows. Tomorrow, we will be welcoming our new teachers on campus as part of our new teacher orientation. Ms. Tara Rounds has been pulling together the day for our new teachers, and I'm excited to introduce them to Haldane and to several members of our staff as we go through the day together tomorrow. And this week, our fall athletics programs all got off to a great start. Had the opportunity to go down to the athletic fields and see some of our student athletes and our coaches, and they're hard at work, and we look forward to the fall season. So I would say I categorized the feeling as we enter this school year as one of cautious optimism. It definitely feels different than last year with so many unknowns that are now known. But at the same time, it's tempered by the fact that we're still amidst the pandemic that's influencing our school operation and likely will for some time. So that being said, it definitely has a different feel to it than last year, and we're really excited to welcome students and staff back next week. To go into just some detail related to our reopening plans, I'd like to take the other microphone and pull up some slides and remind me, what button do I press? B? Okay. B it is.
How many new staff members do we have? Do you know?
Let's see. I believe we have, Julia, I feel like we are somewhere around to 7, if I'm not mistaken. Do you happen to know?
5 new staff members will be there tomorrow.
Right. We were going through the numbers today, and I'm confused. I know we have 20 total people who will be here tomorrow between mentors, administrators, and new staff members. So, but 5 new staff members who will be welcome. Thank you, Julia. So for this evening, and I just want to make sure all right. For this evening, I do want to provide a greater level of detail to the board on our reopening plans. I did share an outline of these plans with the community last week. And some shifts this year are to consider for the board, because this is going to be on later this evening for action, is that we are no longer under a state of emergency in New York State. So I think the board had become accustomed to the administration making recommendations over the course of the school year as it relates to health and safety procedures and that we were putting in place, which we shifted over the course of the year. And under those executive orders, the superintendent had the authority to do so without necessarily having board action. However, since we're no longer under a state of emergency, those authorities that the superintendent had previously no longer exist. So upon the advice of legal counsel, we are putting the actions or the procedures that the district plans to take for the upcoming school year before the board for consideration and for action. And obviously, we'll seek tonight to answer any questions that the board may have. I know these are large, that we've had extensive discussion on many of these items over the course of the last 18 months, but it is another opportunity for the board to hear from the community if anybody wanted to come forward and share thoughts related to this, or if board members themselves had questions. So I'll provide an overview of some of these shifts and perhaps most importantly, the philosophy that that these shifts, that these policies or procedures would be based upon, and then we can open it up for discussion. So the first two goals that we had in entering to planning for the upcoming year was to provide students with access to in-person instruction and extracurricular opportunities to the greatest extent possible. We felt that that was how we ended the last school year. We gradually worked towards that through the year with great success, and that's where we wanted to start this school year, as long as it was safe to do so. Obviously, an important component of that is to implement health and safety standards based on what's happening here in Phillipstown, to the extent that we can assess that, which would include community transmission rates, vaccination status, and any local testing data that is available to us. So as a reminder, our students are due to come back next Thursday. Our staff is due to come back to school on Tuesday of next week. We've structured a plan that would allow for all students K through 12 to attend in-person instruction every day. Again, we gradually worked towards that last year while we implemented in-person instruction or had that available to students K-8 from the start of the school year. It was some time before we were able to bring our high school students back full-time, which occurred later on in the school year. And then the other significant planning element that we worked around was to revert to our what we're calling our pre-COVID daily schedules, with the middle and high school starting at approximately 7:30 and the elementary school beginning at 8:35. We had a delayed start in at each level last year, and the purpose of that was to provide our teachers with additional planning time to work with remote learners. That was the primary purpose of giving them that time. So in creating our reopening guidance, there were different resources that we referred to in order to create the constructs of the plan. And I'll start by saying that schools were under the assumption that we would have had guidance from the New York State Department of Health to plan around for the upcoming year. At some point in the summer, while Governor Cuomo was still in office, he had indicated that that guidance would not be forthcoming from the State Department of Health. As of today, with Governor Hochul in office, she has now indicated that she's going to direct the New York State Department of Health to provide such guidance to schools. My sense is that our guidelines are likely consistent with whatever recommendations now or requirements now are going to be in place from the New York State Department of Health, a significant one being masking requirements. Governor Hochul has indicated through her comments to the media over the last 2 days that schools should be prepared to implement a uniform mask policy. We had already taken that step in our planning efforts. So I would expect, again, a few more things that maybe she has not yet indicated would be included in that. I know there's talk around vaccination requirements or testing requirements for individuals who are not vaccinated. We would be prepared, again, to implement a standard such as that in our schools. So we likely will now have guidance coming to us. I won't even call it guidance, but requirements defined by the New York State Department of Health, but those have not yet been fully defined. We expect those to come over in the coming days or weeks. That being said,
can I just ask a question about that? Mm-hmm. The expectation about the masking mandate is that it is for indoors.
Correct.
Not outdoors?
Correct.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll speak to that a little bit more when we come to that. We did have guidance from the CDC this summer, the American Academy of Pediatrics. The New York State Education Department attempted to step in the absence of guidance from the state and provide their own set of recommendations, which largely mirrored the CDC guidance. We also had a notice from the Putnam County Department of Health that was more specific to their recommendation regarding mask wearing last week or the week before, just losing sense of what the timing on that was. And also we consulted with Dr. Corsaro, and Dr. Corsaro, our district physician, had some strong feelings about what policies should be in place from a public health perspective inside of our schools as we entered the school year. So we're not in, the message I'm trying to convey to the community is that in our planning efforts and our recommendations to the board now, we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're looking to who we would consider the experts in the field or the individuals who are most closely connected to local health information to guide our planning efforts. This was a comment to Dr. Corsaro to our schools or to the schools in which he serves as a district physician. And I just want to read it aloud because I do think that there's, I want to make sure that we have accurate information or provided accurate information to our community specific to the Delta variant. So Dr. Corsaro had shared that the Delta variant in an infected individual is associated with 100 times the viral load than the original COVID strain. And thus we're dealing with a substantially more contagious virus than we were dealing with at the beginning of the pandemic. Hence, from an epidemiological perspective, this is not the time to retreat. Retreat is in reference to our health and safety procedures that we had in place, but to keep everything in place while we attempt to bring everyone back into the classroom. Dr. Corsaro happened to be on campus today. I had the opportunity to talk to him just a little bit more about this. And really his primary concern is just on the contagious, the fact that this variant is more contagious than previous variants, and wanting to see how, with the prospect of more students coming back into school, not necessarily at Haldane because we had a large number of our students in school at the beginning of last school year, but with more students generally coming back into the school, if there's any potential risk of spread for this particular variant. You may be familiar with the Swiss cheese model, which was becoming prominent in discussion last year regarding mitigation strategies. So this is from a Times article some time ago. The emphasis of the Swiss cheese model is that no one mitigation strategy in and of itself will contain the spread of the virus. It's the combination of those mitigation efforts that will contain the spread of the virus in settings such as schools. And some of those fall under the umbrella of personal responsibilities, and others fall under the umbrella of shared responsibilities. And I will say that this graphic, those mitigation strategies along the bottom are in no particular order. So you see vaccines last there. This graphic was created prior to a vaccine actually having been developed. So just because it's last on the model doesn't mean vaccines are least effective. What we hear now is actually quite the opposite. Vaccinations are the first step in helping contain the spread of the virus inside of in our communities, schools included. So both the CDC and the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended universal indoor masking for all individuals regardless of vaccination status. And that's the standard that we're seeking to establish here at Haldane. That was the standard last year. We had great success. We are looking to continue that as the standard into this upcoming school year. As Jen had noted with the governor's comments today and over the past few days, we do believe that that will be what the Department of Health is going to require now for all schools in New York State. So we're paying attention and working closely with the Putnam County Department of Health on what the quarantine requirements will be, because this somewhat can guide or help us as we're considering how we set up our classrooms. Obviously, masking we anticipate to be
component of our procedures next year. It's important for our community to understand the part of the importance of having a uniform, or the benefit of having a uniform masking policy, is that it will lead to virtually any need to quarantine large group of students in the case that there is a student in a classroom who we find has tested for COVID positive, or an adult in a classroom who we find has tested positive for COVID. We ran into this a few times last year. We ran into the situation a few times last year where a student was in the class and subsequently was tested positive for COVID, or an adult was, and we had to quarantine or direct the entire class to quarantine for 10 days. And that's quite disruptive. It's disruptive to families. It's disruptive a bit to student learning, even though we had a remote learning setup under the current quarantine guide. Oh, but I will share that having observed that over the course of the school year for Haldane, we had no documented cases of a student actually who is under quarantine actually having become infected. And that was largely the observation in schools across Putnam and across New York State. The situations may have varied, but by and large, the quarantine, the guidelines now have been adjusted for students, as long as they're wearing a mask and we're observing a certain level of distancing in the classroom, to not have to quarantine if an infected student is still somehow in the classroom. We are still guiding any family, or would be guiding any family, if their child is experiencing COVID symptoms, that they should be tested for COVID and they should stay home. We still feel that's was an important part of maintaining a safe learning environment last year, and it'll be an important part if we seek to do the same this year. So now a minimum of 3 feet of distancing is being recommended in classroom settings. This was something that was studied in schools last year throughout the country. There was a good research done out of, I think it was Harvard, if I remember correctly, regarding distancing of 6 feet versus distancing of 3 feet. And that went through a good peer review process, which is something we want to be mindful of whenever we're reading research. And subsequently, the guidance shifted to schools around March of last year, that you could reduce distancing from 6 feet, because that's how we started last year, to 3 feet. It was that guidance that allowed us to bring all of our high school students back. So going into the school year, we're going to maintain a minimum of 3 feet of physical distancing in all of our classrooms. We will maximize that to the greatest extent that we can. So in some classrooms, we still may be at 6 feet, but at minimum, we'll be at 3 feet in all of our rooms. Masks, we're recommending to be required indoors, regardless of vaccination status. We still will maintain our outdoor classroom setups and designs. That was great last year. And each classroom will still have a designated outdoor space for use. The district continues to implement a very high standard for ventilation. I don't have Tim here this evening, so I'll do my best to cover this, but our filter ratings are exactly what they should be. And we've actually taken the additional step this year of putting HEPA filtration units in each classroom. So that was something that was reserved for classrooms last year that did not have, were not hooked up to unit ventilation in the building. So those classrooms that are in the Mabel Merritt building, we've gone ahead and just purchased those for all of our classrooms in the district. So that may take a couple of weeks to get in place in all of the classrooms. Again, it's not, I wouldn't say this is a necessity in order to operate our schools. We didn't have these in place in every classroom last year, but we did have some additional federal funding, as you're familiar with, and we did decide to take that step to put a HEPA filtration unit, a standalone unit inside of each classroom throughout our campus. We do feel that this year would be the opportune time to make a shift to begin using our cafeteria space again. If, in the case of inclement weather, if you may recall, we had, speaking specifically to K-8 last year, we had students eat lunch in their classrooms. We do feel that it's better for our students to be eating in the cafeteria as long as we can ensure distancing in the cafeteria. This will require some use of space changes. We may have to use some adjacent rooms. And again, this is in the event that our students can't eat outside. We still plan to enable our students to eat outside as long as the weather's cooperating. Students will be required to wear a mask if they're accessing the district's transportation. They will be required to sit 3 feet apart on the bus. We do have that ability on our buses to do so. This has become a point of criticism in some districts, or communities, I should say, because so many students ride the bus that, well, whatever distancing, that it may become a point that would provoke a quarantine because students aren't far enough apart. So we don't anticipate that being an issue here because of the number of walkers that we have come to school or the number of students who are dropped off. We feel we can still maintain 3 feet on all of our buses. This does not apply to siblings. Siblings can sit together on the bus, but it does apply to any other student.
And you also, the bus drivers encourage the windows to be slightly open when the weather's
windows open, as well as the roof windows on the bus will be open as well, as long as it's not too cold and or rainy.
Yeah.
So we are in the process of implementing our testing program again. You'll recall that last year we did have access to rapid antigen testing on campus. We see that as an important element. It very well may become a requirement for us to implement. So we already had plans underway to implement a testing program for our students and for our staff. We'll be mindful now of any requirements that come down and communicating that to families. So as of today, we would require consent in order to do this. I anticipate we'll still require consent in order to test. I don't think that's going to change. But the health department language may be more definitive. I certainly expect it for staff. I don't know what, I can't imagine it would go beyond a recommendation. I'm speculating for students, but I think it's important for our families to know that if the Department of Health takes such a stance. So we have included these forms in our communication last week. Families can register via Family ID, and we'd like to see as many families and obviously staff members commit to the testing program on campus over the course of this school year. The good news on this, no different than as the school received additional federal dollars, so did Putnam County. So the Putnam County, the superintendents in Putnam County are working closely with the Department of Health to further organize our testing programs and to access the benefits that come with sharing resources. One of those shared resources we're exploring is the potential to hire a shared nurse that can move between districts. So Ms. O'Hara and Ms. Shelters are not, can attend to other nursing responsibilities here. They've been great in helping with our testing program, but it would be nice to have our own dedicated nurse or access to a dedicated nurse with another district to help facilitate the testing program that we implement. So I expect that we'll have our testing program up and running towards the mid or latter part of September. And just a note, because I received some questions on this regarding how many of our staff were vaccinated. This was prior to any vaccination requirements being expressed. We played a large role in coordinating vaccination appointments for our staff or with our staff, along with the Putnam County Department of Health clinics that were set up. So we have some information available to us in the summer regarding staff vaccination status. And by our count, as of March, 86% of Haldane staff were already fully vaccinated. We'll follow up with our staff as they return to campus to see what this figure is. As of September, it's only higher. We just don't know to what extent. But we were already in a good place at the end of last school year. And I think it's a testament, again, to the commitment of our community and our staff to be as safe as possible for themselves and also for their school community. This is just an overview of the guidelines that I've summarized for you. You'll likely find this on our website. We might distribute it through social media. So I've just included it here. I like it. Megan does a great job organizing these. So this is a quick summary of what our guidelines are on campus. And perhaps one of the biggest shifts that we're making this year is discontinuing the large-scale remote instruction model. I will say that our teachers did a fantastic job simultaneously implementing remote instruction last year while they were teaching students who were physically present in the classroom. But that was less than ideal. It was done really out of necessity. I think again, our staff did a fantastic job, but it's not a model that really we are set up to employ, in perpetuity. So we feel that part of the success of our model last year was working with families to guide them back to in-person instruction. We had over 95% of our kids were in person by the end of last school year. So as part of our planning going into this school year, we knew that the potential for families to access remote learning was less than those who were going to be accessing it at the start of last school year. We still do have a couple of families who feel out of medical necessity are not able, whose students are not able to, or children are not able to access in-person instruction. We're trying our best to work closely with those families now in preparation for the upcoming school year. But by and large, the remote instruction model that we were implementing last year will not be continued. Now, we're prepared in the event that students have to quarantine, and we don't have a sense, again, we don't anticipate that to be on the scale that students had to quarantine last year. But in the event of a student having to quarantine, because we are still in a public health emergency, we will make remote instruction available to them. That's a required long-term absence from school, so we see that as the best way to make sure our students can keep up with their studies while they're quarantining at home, or a staff member quarantining. We want to put that staff member in a position where they can facilitate instruction remotely. Students can still come to school. We'll likely have an aide or a TA in a classroom, but the staff member can still play a role in facilitating instruction with the technology that we have in place. We're prepared if this situation continues to evolve, to facilitate remote instruction for all students if we have to close school for some reason. That's not something that we see as on the horizon, but we don't know. As other variants play out, we know that the Delta variant is more contagious than previous variants. We are prepared to go to an all-school remote model if needed, but as of now, we're planning for that, but we're expecting the best, that won't be necessary as we go into this school year. So any other related absence from school, we will revert back to our homebound instruction practices. Those are facilitated at the school level, may vary a little bit by teacher, but we will revert back to those practices in the event that a student is just sick from school. And we've said this all along, if a student's sick, they should focus on just getting better. It's not, if someone's sick with I'll say the seasonal flu, we don't want them to stress about keeping up with their studies. We will have work set aside for them, but really they should be focusing on just getting better and then coming back to school ready to learn. So we are reverting back to those policies, or I should say procedures. As I mentioned, athletics, in this slide, it says all fall sports will occur as scheduled. This was drafted last week. Fall sports are occurring. There was some, I will say, speculation regarding whether or not fall sports were in jeopardy based on the guidance that had been provided by the New York State Education Department. If you were to review that document, there was a recommendation that high-risk sports be canceled. Quite frankly, I did not see the need to delay high-risk sports in any way. We had athletics occurring back in March and April, and May and June, but I'm thinking specifically of football and volleyball, which were delayed last year because they were high risk. Those sports are scheduled to begin, obviously, in the fall during the regular season. And we had good success last year when COVID rates were at a similar level. And I didn't see that as a reason in any way to delay their start this year. So there were some articles you may have read about whether or not fall sports were in jeopardy. I will say that in speaking with superintendents, and we stay pretty in close with one another, this was never a question for us. So, I know there was a lot of speculation, but I don't think that was something that was really ever, that was not something that we were even entertaining delaying for the fall. We may want to go ahead and implement testing policy for students who are engaged in high-risk sports. I think that is something we should consider. We're not at a point yet to do anything with that, just as we get our testing program established. I'm curious what the Department of Health guidance says. So we were already anticipating the potential to ask our student athletes to engage in a weekly or some sort of regular testing if they were going to be participating in a high-risk sport or any other high-risk activity, because it's not limited just to athletics. And that's still part of our planning right now. We just don't have something in place for the start of the school year.
And Phil, that would ultimately be something that we would provide. The onus wouldn't be upon the
Correct.
family or the child.
Yeah, and the benefit, Sean, as I referred to the federal money that the county now has, the ordering of tests is now being facilitated through the county, whereas last year it was being facilitated through the state. So it's a closer point of contact for us, so we won't have any issues getting in touch with anybody at the county. And their access to testing, there's a variety of testing now that's available to us, so that's part of our conversation is which type of testing do we want to employ. We have 4 different options that we're discussing, as well as the support that potentially could come along with it. So we want to do this right when it comes time to do it, and that's something that I think is going to be very helpful to us, the fact that the county is playing a role in coordinating this through the Department of Health, as opposed to us, coordinating somewhat on our own last year. The county was there to guide us, but it was really left to our school nurses to implement. Okay, and our principals, some final notes here. Our principals are facilitating a reopening webinar with our parents that's scheduled for Thursday at 4 p.m., just another point of contact to discuss any questions that our parents may have. As I mentioned earlier, the first day of school is next Thursday. We're very excited. We do have, just a reminder, we have students in session for 2 days, then we have a long weekend, and then we're back in session again after Labor Day and Rosh Hashanah. Any other questions from the board?
Yes. Will there be cohorting this year? My fifth grade year wants to know if he can play with his friends
Correct.
that are in his homeroom at recess.
Will there be?
Cohorting?
So I know Ms. Jamin, given the changes we made in the cafeteria and recess being attached to lunch, that she's currently making some final adjustments to the cafeteria, the lunch and recess schedule. Last week we had the distancing in the cafeteria at 3 feet. We went through a review of this plan with our reopening committee, the core team, but also our academic committee, which had parents on it. And we heard some feedback through that process, and quite frankly, it was good feedback. It prompted us to go back and review the CDC guidelines and some things that we may have missed, which really emphasize keeping students 6 feet apart, which will limit the number of students who we can bring into the cafeteria and we're initially planning for. So our goal is to have students outside at recess with their classmates to the extent that we can, but that shift in the cafeteria may cause the schedule not quite to run as it did pre-COVID.
But as for now, they can hang out. The different classes can hang out together on the playground?
Yeah, there's really no limit. If a teacher wanted to take classes outside at any other point, which sometimes our teachers choose to, for them to be limited in an outdoor setting with other classes, we are asking our students and our teachers to be deliberate in making sure that there's a level of distancing that everyone's still maintaining while they're out there, because they are unmasked. But I will say that there's been little evidence that I've seen, if any at all, that there's risk of spread in an outdoor setting, masked or unmasked. So This is something I played particularly close attention to, just because, the importance of play and socialization in an outdoor setting, especially at the elementary level, is it's an important facet of our school and a child's growth. So there's been really little to no evidence to suggest that students are at greater risk in an outdoor setting. So we want our kids to be outside and have that opportunity with one another.
And was there, on that note, on a very small note too, I know that there was considerable concern about the shared use of sports equipment, recess and things like sharing balls and things like these. Are the things that obviously Principal Jamin will cover, but I know those are little questions you hear at Food Town, so I'm just curious.
So shift, we still are going to go through a daily cleaning protocol with any shared equipment. However, last year, that would have occurred on almost a period-by-period basis in some of our classrooms. We don't see the need for that. We see that it's still necessary to go through a cleaning protocol at the end of the day with any shared materials, equipment, as you noted, Sean, but it's not necessary to go as far as to cleaning the equipment, 10 different times a day. Now, that can really vary by equipment, though, so there are some caveats to that. If we're in a phys ed class and, there's little perspiration, coating the ball, it should be wiped down, it should be disinfected and clean. But just the general type of play, the light play activities, I would say, or recreational activities that we see the majority of our students engaging in, swinging on the swings at recess, using the playground equipment. Again, very little, if any, evidence to suggest that COVID is being spread through contact with those types of materials. So might be some distinguishing in the type of activity, but by and large, reduced cleaning of such equipment as compared to last year. I will say, though, I don't want this to get conflated. Our cleaning routines within the building, doorknobs, handles, etc., will remain the same.
Dr. Benante, I think that it's such a great idea that the principals are doing a webinar for the parents, and I like that they're all doing it together. I think that that's great. I'm curious as to why you're doing it at 4 o'clock, though, during the work day.
Well,
that doesn't seem very user-friendly to our parents.
That Ms. Sniffen could leave after her code of conduct presentation, but I see she's still here. So Julia, as the
Throw the
principal's
ball
planned
to
it.
her on that one.
I don't know if there was no intention behind.
I think we also said we're going to record it, obviously, and put it out and make it live after. We were doing 3 separate ones. And one was the Monday after, one was going to be Thursday night at 6, one was going to be Thursday at 4, and I think when we just said, let's just do one so that parents don't have to go to 3 different if they have kids in multiple buildings.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think that makes a lot of sense.
We just went, all right, well, let's just do Thursday at 4. I don't think it was, not that we were intentionally doing it during the workday or not during the workday. I think we also then said, we'll record it and we'll send it out.
Okay.
So that was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe that fixes it if it's recorded and sent out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I know our principals have each, or will if they haven't, but I'm pretty sure this has occurred, expressed to their families. If anybody has specific questions, they're always welcome to reach out. And I know some questions have come in over the last week since we set out our initial letter to the community, and the principals have been fielding those and handling those well.
2 quick questions. Are we doing attestations this year?
No.
Okay, great. Or thank you. I don't know whether great is the right answer, but second question is, if I'm a student who's vaccinated and I sign up for testing, I get tested and I'm positive, I'm symptom-free, am I because the monitor symptoms, stay home until you're 10 days after you're symptom-free? Just stay home for 10 days?
Most likely.
Okay.
We were speaking with the Department of Health today about a situation such as that, and there may be an opportunity that if they were to consult with their family physician for potential reentry sooner. This is where the type of test sometimes is an indicator of how we would guide the family, or how a health professional would guide someone who finds themselves in that situation in the days that follow. We've had situations where someone tested positive on a rapid test, but then followed up with a PCR and tested negative, remained symptom-free, and was subsequently released. sooner than the 10 days. So that would initiate that level of communication and guidance if a situation like that were to occur. They're fairly limited. This is where our size benefits us. More often than not, to my knowledge, when we've encountered those situations, we've really walked through that with the family to ensure that we were maintaining a standard for who's coming in and out on campus, but also we were connected with the Department of Health, who would be issuing any quarantine order, so we could liaise with the family to really make sure that they had the appropriate guidance and while adhering to any health and safety standard that we had on campus.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And John said the attestation, that's the Daly health screener. So just to elaborate. So again, it just didn't demonstrate the way COVID has now manifests and the chances of someone being asymptomatic but still potentially having COVID. The Daly health screener just didn't demonstrate to be a real variable in determining or helping us identify individuals who were ill and keeping COVID out of our school. Quite frankly, testing is a better approach. And remember, the Daly Health Screener was at the beginning of last school year, and we continued it throughout, but we didn't have a testing program in place. So we get better information from testing than we get from the Daly Health Screener.
I was just going to say, is there anything else, plans for chorus, band, and plays and musicals, especially with the singing?
Yeah, so that would be considered high risk. So, and we want our students to engage in those activities. They're a great facet of our school. Our educators were great last year in making use of our outdoor space, but really it's not possible to facilitate instruction to the depth that they normally would prefer in an outdoor setting. Did a great job at it, but we really do need access to the instruments and the equipment that we have available in school. So for the start of the school year, we're still going to balance the use of outdoor space and potentially the use of indoor space with increased distancing in school. The distancing requirements for those activities can be a bit restrictive. That's another area that we would identify as having students engage in a testing program in order to allow them to access the indoor space to the extent that they would like to and that our educators would like to and I think prefer to. So the program is running in a way that is consistent with I think what our families and our students would come to expect pre-COVID.
Sorry, my last question.
No, it's fine.
And I know you haven't said much about it, and it's coming, but there are a lot of families, sports families, who are wondering about, you mentioned there's 4 different testing options. Is there anything else we can say or what's being considered?
I think, I would say as far as those testing options, some of them are PCR tests, some of them are rapid tests. There's a range that are available to schools that would the school would facilitate. There's some that are available. One of them is available. It's actually a home test kit. The logistics and the concern with the PCR test is the turnaround time. The rapid tests are very convenient because we get a result within 15 minutes. They're not perfect. So we're probably moving in the direction of more of an antigen test just for ease of facilitation. And the results, they can be resulted right there. The families can have that information. Concern is if all these schools are going to implement testing programs, and I think a lot will, those PCR turnaround times are going to go from what is now 24 hours to potentially 72, maybe even longer. We saw this last year with other testing programs. The concern is if one of those results is positive, now you're tracing back 4 days of activity of that individual, potentially impacting, quarantines, because we're talking about activities where students would not be masked in athletics or may not be masked in athletics. And that has the potential now to cause other students to have to quarantine in those types of environments. Again, we don't know. It's just the Department of Health guides us in those quarantine orders. So, if to be pressed right now, we're probably looking at a rapid testing program, but again, nothing that's been established for athletes yet, but likely to come.
Thank you.
I have one last question too, and that's about, since we're not going to be doing attestation, the daily screeners, are we following the same protocol for, I'm a a fourth grader, I come in and I have a runny nose. Mom and dad probably thought it was best just to send them in because it's just allergies.
Right.
But
You're going to the nurse's office.
Okay.
We're going to have that conversation with each family. So, yeah, it's the same. We're talking to our staff about identifying. Our staff was great with this last year. It came up rarely because our parents, I think, were so good about being supremely cautious about sending their child to school if they were displaying any potential symptoms of COVID. But our staff will be directed to have those students come down to the nurse's office. The nurse will initiate a conversation with the family. We're trying to distinguish between seasonal allergies is the most common one that we encounter, and just the fact that the family can provide a level of reassurance. Nope, it's it's Sean's allergies or hay fever, whatever it may be. But we can also provide guidance to the family if for some reason there's a question regarding that.
Yeah, and Sean, I mentioned the same thing during our reopening task force meeting, that the Daly screeners may not have been very helpful to the district, but I found it quite helpful as a parent, just as a reminder in my head to make sure my kid didn't have those things before I sent them. And I think Dr. Benante has said that he will be reminding parents to go through that checklist, on your own, just to double check.
So this item, the construct of our reopening plan and details related to it are included on a subsequent action item later on in our agenda. And thank you again for your attention this evening. Jen, with that, we're going to transition to a discussion about the tax rate, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
Sounds
and
good.
I'm going to ask Ann actually to lead us through that. So Ann will come up here and I'll take a seat. Minimize. I'll bring this back to you.
Okay, so later on in the meeting, the board will be setting the tax rate. But before the tax rate is established and the warrant is approved, you need to decide what to do about excess fund balance. So I just thought that it would be useful to go through what is fund balance and where does it come from? And we talk a lot about fund balance in different forms. So just to, in a nutshell, we're going to go back to June 30th of last year because we have to start with our fund balance from last year, and then we arrive at this year's. All of the fund balance and the reserves together are called fund equity. So our fund equity as of last year was $4.566559 million. I've listed the reserves on this slide just to show what all the different reserves that the district has and what the amounts are. Later down in the slide, there's assigned appropriated fund balance, and that's the amount that is put towards next year's as a revenue. I call it a plug. I'm not a fan of using appropriated fund balance, but once you start using it, you're kind of stuck in it. Ours is normally $645,000, but if you recall that last year the board put $50,000 towards the tax levy, and that's why it's $695 as of June 30th of 2020. The other figure is reserved for encumbrances, and those are open encumbrances at the end of the year that roll forward and increase the budget only because it's already approved money from the year before. So,
Just before you jump, sorry.
yes.
Remind me, or I'll just go with me. Remind me what EBLAR stands for?
EBLAR is Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve. Those are for payouts of accrued benefits, sick time or
Yep.
vacation time that someone might be eligible for when they leave. If it's a large amount
Yep.
that's over what's in the budget, we can go into the reserve.
Fantastic, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So just in this slide, because I'd like to speak going forward without our big, long list of reserves, I just added them all up, and they're $2,020,607. It's just everything that was on the previous slide added together so that it's not so difficult to follow. So for this year that is just ended, when I'm saying this year, I'm talking about 2021 because that's where our fund equity changes. So the change in fund equity is the difference between our revenues and our expenditures. And this year we have excess revenue over expenditures of $829,773. That's for the one school year, 2021. Now you add that 829 to the previous total fund equity, and we're at $5,396,332. Take out the reserves that haven't changed yet. The assigned appropriated fund balance for 21-22 budget was $645 because the $50,000 was just for the 1 year. Our reserve for encumbrances are a little less than last year. And after you subtract those three amounts, you have available fund balance as of June 30th of 21 of $1,998,330. Remember, we're allowed to have 4% that's undesignated. So that leaves us with an excess fund balance of $960,257. So that is starting the discussion of where to put that before the tax warrant is established. It is larger than the last few years, that amount, and there are some factors that influenced that. And these factors are all on the revenue side, okay? And I know that a lot of it is because of COVID. The carryover, the deferred revenue from 1920, that's the 20% that the state withheld from our aid in certain aids last year. And we couldn't count it as revenue in 1920, but it gets pushed forward when they give it to us, and the state gave it to us for 2021. So we have to recognize that as revenue this year. We used BOE services more than we had anticipated previously, so our aid was up. We have some unanticipated tuition and special ed reimbursement, refund of prior year expenses were quite high. Ours are normally not this high at all. There were some unused BOE services from the year before, so BOCES had a surplus. That surplus is then passed on to the district. And insurance recoveries, most of that is a workers' comp settlement that we had. And just to point out that all of this totals $476,000, but it's a non-recurring revenue stream. So it was just, what caused this atypical excess fund balance, and almost $500,000 is from unanticipated revenue. So now, to use those funds, the options for the board is to, again, allocate funds to lower the tax levy, fund the reserves, or a combination of both. A little history of the last 5 years, and then our recommendation. The total excess fund balance is in the first column, and then the reserves funded change, throughout whatever the needs are for the years as we go forward. The recommendation changes. I'd like to point out that every year we take care of the deficit in the lunch fund. Otherwise, it just keeps growing. Some good news for the tax rate. As the warrant as it stands now, the 21-22 tax rate increase for the town of Phillipstown is 0.585%. It came in lower than when we were talking about. That's the equalization rate did go down a bit, but mostly because of the Butterfield project was finished, and that added to our tax base. So on a taxable assessed value of $250,000, which because of the equalization rate, the market value is about $560,000, this property would see an annual increase of $55.
Okay, do you mind if I jump in and ask a question? All right, thank you. Because I can never keep this straight. So in May, we thought the tax rate was generally, correct me if I'm wrong, it was generally going up like 1.8.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. And so now we realize that the tax rate is only going up about 0.6. So the difference from then to now is that over the course of this, correct me if I'm wrong, over the course of the summer, there was a realization that the taxable base in the community had expanded by a number of properties, e.g. Butterfield or otherwise. So the overall taxes we're still raising the same amount of money. That
Correct.
money is being spread over more parcels, so an individual is seeing their taxes going up less.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
The levy is the same.
Great, thank you.
So our recommendation for that excess fund balance, we have, if you saw in the previous slide, $240,000 was recommended to fund the school lunch fund deficit. Really, that's in two sections. The $140,000 deficit was from the 1920 school year. That was the audit report, and that's usually we're 1 year behind when we recommend to fund for the school lunch deficit. That was larger in itself because of COVID. When we stopped in March, all that we were providing were the free and reduced that we were required. So our deficit was larger in 1920 than it normally is. Now, in 2021, where the lunch staff was delivering to the classrooms and the participation was low and the prices of the food that we were getting was high, that lunch deficit is over $200,000. So we're recommending that we get ahead of that deficit while the funds are available with these non-recurring revenues to pay part of that deficit for 2021. And the plan, now that we'll be serving from the cafeteria and the students will be coming down, and all we're on the free program for everyone for the entire year, I anticipate that deficit won't be as large. So next year we'll be in a better position than we are this year. The reserves for tax tertiaries, we do have a reserve now. The anticipation is that we're going to be seeing a lot of tax tertiaries with the values of homes, because when a home is sold, it's reassessed, and it's going to be at the higher market value. And then there's going to be a lot of, I think, tax tertiaries.
I'm sorry, what is a tax?
A tax tertiary would be, there are companies that do that, and they will fill out a request for the assessor to have their assessment looked at and reviewed and probably lowered.
Got it.
And then when that happens, we have to refund the difference in the taxes.
Got it. Okay.
The reserve for TRS, recommending that that be increased because we don't know what the effects of the last couple of years when the rates were low. The market is high now. We don't have that crystal ball, but that's at the high point. The fear is that if that really, the market goes down, so does the TRS investments. Therefore, the rate would go up because we have to cover the expense. Capital reserve, $425,000. We used our capital reserve in the last referendum. We can fund it up to $1 million. Right now, we have $67,000. So it is low for us, our typical capital reserve funding. It would be a good place to put that. And lastly, the new liability reserve for $100,000. And that is our recommendation. And that is also the end of my information.
Thank you, Anne. Any questions for Anne? That was so helpful, actually. I really liked how you started the presentation. I feel like I haven't seen you those first two slides before, where you really laid out how we got here. I thought that was really helpful, so thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
We'll vote on this later if there's not any questions now, and we can have further discussion
I'm
later.
just curious about the school, the lunch program, and did the federal government provide any assistance there since it was regulated, or do we anticipate? I know that Biden is in one way or another pushing towards increase in SNAP benefits. Do we anticipate?
Yes, what's going to happen in 2021, and it partially happened in 21-22, I'm sorry, it partially happened in 2021, where everyone became free.
Right.
So whatever meals that we provided, the federal and the state government reimbursed us for that. That's going to be for everyone in 21-22. We didn't get anything extra.
Right.
To subsidize, in keeping everyone employed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Okay. Any communication from the public at this time? No. Okay, our information reports are here for everybody's review. Going into consent agenda minutes. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Is there any discussion? These are for our June 23rd, July 6th, and July 13th meetings. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Consent agenda financial. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion?
I have just a question about the appointment of Lucy Straub for OT services at the Manitou School. Is that typical, or have Manitou students come here for the services?
We have the option of providing the service ourselves or making arrangements some way for the service to be provided. Our ability to provide the service ourselves is sometimes influenced by the students who we have and our current level of staffing, this current number of students who would be accessing OT services, and along with our current level of staffing. So in this case, Ms. Rounds is recommending that we contract out for the service to Manitou.
Right. And the other question I had was about, I guess it didn't occur to me, that we are doing the Before Care program this year. at the elementary school.
Yeah, so we, and just to add a brief note there, the Phillipstown Recreation Department took an assessment. Actually, I think we actually ended up doing it, but in collaboration with them, of how many families would access the before-school care. They were concerned about whether or not enough families would access it for it to be viable. But based on the assessment that we took at the end of last school year, they determined that they could run the program.
Great.
For this year.
That's all. Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, consent agenda personnel. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? There's a lot of action on
lot
this
going on.
consent
Yeah.
agenda. There's a
One
lot happening
question.
here in August.
And this is mostly just a process question, I think. It's about with the recommendation to hire the temporary BCBA. Would that typically be a contracted year to year? Is it that particular?
I'm sorry, you said temporary, Sean. I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Item 10?
Yeah, let's see here. Let me pull up. I made that in my notes. Number 10, appointment of board certified behavior analyst.
Mm-hmm.
And then, let's see, maybe I looked up in the memorandum, Dr. Philip Tara Rounds, it says regarding the recommendation of temporary appointment for Miss Samantha. And I was just curious if that is
It is
just
not temporary.
Oh, I see.
She's being placed into a
okay.
probationary
It's a probationary.
position.
That's why I said it's a process thing.
Correct.
Yeah, I just was clarification.
Sorry, I didn't note that when I reviewed her recommendation.
No,
But
no.
I understand why it would
Yeah, that was my
prompt
only question.
the question. So it's
Great.
a probationary appointment.
That's
and,
what I thought. Okay.
we're looking forward to having Samantha.
Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Oh, well, I was just wondering about the appointment of volunteer assistant boys soccer coach. We appoint volunteers? Okay.
We do with our teams that do not have, or we would even do it for a team that had a dedicated assistant coach, a paid. We still provide our coaches with the opportunity, if they can coordinate having someone provide an additional level of support to the team. It would have to be on a volunteer basis, and we would approve those, assuming that they meet all the criteria.
And we've had this discussion semi-recently where the volunteers actually go through a whole process of clearance process and an application process because they are with our kids, potentially, solo. So we want there to be a certain amount of requirements and looking at who's volunteering with our kids. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, going into unfinished business, our transparency audit. Ms. Blatt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, the Board of Education hereby accepts the OSC School District website transparency audit and approves the corrective action plan.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? Dr. Benante?
If I may provide a comment, just a
Please.
bit of a cleanup item, I'll say. On my part, we had presented the corrective action plan to the board months ago. We failed to realize we did not put it on for the board to approve the corrective action plan. So assuming you don't need me to review the corrective action, which was minimal, and then we've already addressed through that audit that occurred through the State Comptroller's Office a year ago.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, CSE, CPSE recommendations. Ms. Platt?
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the recommendation of the Committee on Preschool Special Education and Committee on Special Education as presented.
We have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, district-wide safety team. Ms. Platt?
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the following individuals to be part of the district-wide safety team for the 2021-2022 school year. Dr. Philip Benante, Board Trustee Maggie Valentine, Ms. Christine Jammin, Dr. Marianne Silke, Ms. Julia Sniffen, Ms. Tara Rounds, Mr. Dan Cohen, Mr. Tim Walsh, Deputy Anthony Tolvey, Mr. Joe Vergidamo, and Mr. Ralph Falloon.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, approval of the school district reopening plan. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane Central School District 2021-2022 reopening plan and hereby authorizes the Superintendent of Schools to amend, modify, and/or update the plan as needed.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? I'd like to just thank Dr. Benante for his continued work in this area and say that even though protocols have shifted a little bit, where now the school board is approving these plans, on a personal note, I personally fully trust you to make these decisions without our stamp of approval, as you have been doing throughout the pandemic. And I thank you and your team for your work. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, approval of the code of conduct. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane School District Code of Conduct for 2021-2022 as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, athletic and extracurricular code of conduct.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane School District Code of Conduct for 2021-2022 as presented.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Just any opposed business really adds a whole nother moment to this. Okay.
Build
School
suspense,
safety and emergency plan. It does. Okay. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane Central School District Safety and Emergency Management Plan for 2021-2022.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, school emergency response plans.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the Haldane Central School District Building Level School Emergency Response Plans for 2021-2022.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, authorization of the use of excess fund balance. Ms. Platt.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby authorizes the use of excess fund balance for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2021 in the following manner. Transfer to School Lunch Fund, $240,000. Transfer to Tax Tertiary Reserve, $100,000. Transfer to TRS Retirement Reserve Subfund, $100,000. Transfer to Capital Reserve, $425,000. And transfer to Liability Reserve, $100,000.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion on the proposal? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right. Tax rolls.
Be it resolved that, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, the Board of Education hereby approves the resolution to confirm the tax rolls, authorize the tax levy, and approve the tax warrant for the 2021-2022 school year.
May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Whew. Thank you, Ms. Platt, for all of that. Any communication from the public at this time? Any board reflections to share?
I was reflecting on the painted roof, which I had not noticed before, and I will congratulate Ms. Denio and Mr. Walsh for getting it done. And there's no more peeling
And no
paint
more
in the
peeling
corner.
right there. It's glorious.
And it's Haldane blue, no doubt.
The blue.
And I similarly wanted to comment on noting the replaced windows in the elementary school as I walked up, and it's nice seeing the new entrance and everything, all fresh and clean, and hopefully trapping in some energy as we move into the fall and the winter. So.
I'll just share that Westchester Putnam School Boards Association is having a Board Officers Academy on Monday, and I was invited to be a panelist, so I will be speaking on behalf of our board superintendent relations specifically. And it will be something that Sean and I have talked about, and we'll be dialoguing and sharing about what's presented as well. So it's and it's their first one that they've done. Usually NYSBA does it, and there's 40 people signed up from just in Westchester and Putnam, board officers, people who are new, and people who are veterans. So it's kind of an exciting workshop. I'll let you know how it goes. Okay, Dr. Benante, any final thoughts?
No final thoughts.
All right, then I would like to make a motion for us to convene into executive session for the purpose of discussing collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, as well as a matter made confidential by FERPA law, and no action is planned to be taken, but we will not be returning to the public meeting. May I have a second, please?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okie dokie.